Thanks, Anki. Thank you, everyone. Great to be here. My name's John. I'm here talking on the future of mobile user experiences, and the grandiosity of that title is certainly not lost on me. In terms of clickbait, that's probably the best I could come up with. But really, what it is a couple of thoughts that have been rambling around in my head for the last year or two, and Anki asked me to come and sort of put all those thoughts on a PowerPoint and see if you could hold an audience for 30 minutes. So here goes nothing. Bit about myself, as Anki kind of mentioned, CTO, not CEO, but close enough for Exogenics. So Exogenics does, we model HVAC systems. So if you're familiar with HVAC, and then there's the cooling element, which is chiller plants. So chilled water plant systems, we model that using ML and sort of model the thermodynamics and try to come up with recommendations on how owners of buildings can save money, basically. We try to drive some optimization and efficiencies through data. I also have an interest in a company called Raya. Raya Technology is also in the ML space, conversational AI. So again, in the real estate industry, they sort of work on technologies that allow real estate agents to automate conversations that they otherwise wouldn't do anyhow, and sort of bubble up the leads and the sales that should be of interest to them because, well, AI has told them that it's interesting. So they're the two companies that I work for, but I have had some mobile experience, just a little bit, just that one product there where, we gave Anki a start in the biz and a couple of others. I think Carlson's also written some lines of code on it, but essentially it's a workplace experience app for a company called CBRE. It's quite a complex app in the sense of it covers a lot of territory, from food and beverage to transit to space booking. So it's doing a lot of completely different things, but also a bit of server-side UI. So looking forward to that talk. But yeah, that's my experience with mobile as well. But really today I'll be talking about my thoughts, my opinions on how ML, is potentially changing the approach to, I guess, the existing paradigms of sort of app-driven user experiences. Excuse my dry throat. It's not COVID, I promise. On the spectrum of user experience, I've kind of categorized them in sort of two ends. And one end is transactional, where it's a transactional intent from the user. It's something atomic function or something low context where we really don't have much information about why something is being performed on the device. It's a very simple user experience, performs one function, but the context around it is extremely low. It's a transactional, what I've called transactional intent. And then there's something that I've called user intent. And this is kind of the high context user story, if you will. Something that is, as a user, I want to do this, so that type statement. And it carries with it a lot of context. And it might be something that if it was something you were developing, you might decompose into some of the transactional stuff on the right or on the left, depending on your perspective. But the point is, and one of the, I guess, the understated or underrepresented facets of user experience is it is all about context for user experience. In some respects, user experience is a very vague formula. It's a function of intent, what it is that I want to do, but really context goes with it equally. Like the context around what it is I'm doing and why is really super important. And UX is the degree to which intent is satisfied in the context that it's made. So I'll probably be leaning on the rideshare example, but it may be that I might be a female out late at night, and in that experience, I'm not a female, I'm just saying hypothetically, and it may be that I want a female driver to take me home late at night. And so booking the ride share is the intent, but the context around that is very different to perhaps me being a bloke on the weekend, just wanting to get to the shops at some point. The same intent of booking rideshare, but the context around that and how the app or experience is able to fill that very much determines how good of a user experience that I have. So apps currently live there on the transactional side, very much kind of low context and transactional, obviously all on a spectrum, but on that side. So the current state of mobile UX, this is probably fairly straightforward to most here, but there's the device and the OS, which I'll use interchangeably tonight. It provides some context to the user experience. It provides graphical libraries, components, shared resources, access to device hardware, things like that. But really the application is the thing that solicits the user intent. And really it's kind of a tautology that whatever solicits the user intent is kind of responsible for the user experience. That kind of goes without saying. And that's the current sort of pattern, if you will, or paradigm that sort of mobile apps have been built on and how they operate. And it kind of has got us this far, and it's kind of been quite amazing, and certainly a large industry is built up around it. But in the search for constant growth, it's kind of hitting its limits, I would argue. And this pattern or paradigm, I think is slowly changing, and there's some pointers to that I'd like to, again, just share tonight. So some of the challenges with that pattern is that it's a very subjective experience. That, when you're looking at an app, you sort of think you're in charge of what's going on, but actually it's what you don't see or what you're not exposed to that is, I think, where the gaps in the market are. So, for example, no road sharing app has said that there's actually been an accident. You're better off not using this app, and you're better off catching a train. You'll get home quicker. So that just doesn't happen. And yet, in the constantly evolving consumer market that is always demanding a more rich experience, I think this is a gap in the market. And I think this is, starting to see some of these challenges be solved. So just to kind of clarify, or sort of put some words around that, is that the UX is bounded to the app objectives. The app that I'm using, I really can't deviate from that. My objective outcomes, whether it's I'm needing a female driver, or price is important at that point in time, or speed is important at that point in time, doesn't really matter. I'm kind of bounded to what it is that the subjective experience of that app, doing quite well and fulfilling my experience, but still subjective, is offering at the expense of perhaps my preferred objective outcomes. We've already talked about transactional intent being limited in an app, and context, which we sort of discussed at the beginning, that is super important when you're trying to deliver these richer experiences. Context is limited at an app level. You don't have the context that is available at a device level or across all your apps. Apps, by definition, have limited context. And it's serviceless. Won't touch on that yet, we'll get to that in a sec. So here are some of the, I guess, the clues that we're seeing that this pattern is changing, and the solicitation of user intent is shifting towards a device. And I think that's quite exciting, because it's going to open up some possibilities as app and as technologists in general. But some of the signals that I'm looking at is that we do see the device and the OS soliciting intent, specifically as it sort of relates to the assistance middleware layer. You could argue that it's not quite device OS, but in any case, the assistant layer is certainly edging towards that layer of the stack, if you will. And so if it's the device that's soliciting the intent, then that opens up actually a whole wide array of what's actually possible fulfilling user experiences if it's the device. So we're seeing natural language be used quite a lot, and we're seeing middleware actually dictating through voice commands what app to open based on certain commands, and it's starting to even make decisions as to which app is the best app to open to fulfill the user intent, not necessarily, it's not always Spotify. It might be a certain reason why it would be another music provider to play a certain song, and the device is starting to make those decisions. And the whole idea of app actions and actually allowing the device or that layer to reach in and actually affect some function, I think is a good sign of things to come, and things will start to become, I think, bidirectional on that layer. Identity context is already shifted to the device, or continually shifting. Identity, who I am as a persona, things about me. The device having access to that context is important for ML to be able to actually do meaningful things in that space. And also payment is a foundation or a bedrock to any app experience, also shifted to the device. Google in the I/O 2022 kind of gave a very detailed overview of sort of the strides being made in understanding situational context, situational awareness of where I am, what I'm doing, the things around me. All these things are super important in being able to obviously understand context, but then being able to do something with that in terms of, again, affecting user experience. So, if we draw those, and finally, the devices are the only thing on your phone, only part of your phone that are actually motivated by your objective outcomes. If you think about it, an app is only motivated to the extent with which it can fulfill the conversion goals that it's got built in, whereas the device is objective in the sense that it just wants the best experience for you, and if it could, and hopefully one day will, be able to find what that best experience looks like out of the array of apps that are essentially plugged into it. So if we draw that kind of, those signals that I just went through in that slide to their kind of, I'll say logical conclusions or their most extreme conclusions, it's going to have some opportunities, I think, for the next wave of development, or at least the pattern of development that I think is somewhat kind of hitting some limits now in terms of UX and what it's able to deliver. There'll be some opportunities around application, user experience, and user interface. So, opportunities for applications. If we are now able to, the device is now able to understand user intent, the high context commands, if you will, or the high context requests or input, then the device itself will be able to orchestrate what that might mean in terms of a set of transactional intents to fulfill that user intent. And what's interesting to sort of navel gaze about all this is it actually doesn't have to do it then and there. It can actually do it at the time that makes sense for those intents to be fulfilled. So if it is 8 a.m. flight, it might be that it sets the alarm as it does, but it also in the morning is monitoring traffic and actually may change that alarm for you in the future or the next morning because it's noticed a change in conditions that is actually means you've got to wake up earlier, whatever it is. And rather than apps sort of dominating the user experience, they'll become kind of like a servant to the OS who is trying to find the best experience for you, and be able to, apps will compete, I guess, in being able to provide their services for that specific intent. And I work obviously in the real estate industry, so there's a lot of, I'm sure sort of everyone has their own version of this, but there's certain standards and models and data models for just about anything you can represent in a commercial building or any of the equipment. It's common language, if you will, and so there's no reason why that couldn't exist for sort of experiences. and essentially act as blueprints for these transactions. And bi-directional vetting. So now where we can sort of plug in to an app, reach in and trigger some code through a hook or through an action, we can actually talk to the app and see if it's in the best position to fulfill a certain request for certain context or parameters. So applications could become headless, or at least partly headless, driven by domain definitions and adopt a service architecture. Opportunities for user experience, they're kind of one and the same. I've kind of covered the user experience as well. But again, a storyboard of transactional intents sort of orchestrated by the device that can be continually monitored by the device and affect change at any time that it makes sense as the context changes. Of course, users would be able to override that, hopefully, and certainly train and build their own storyboards of transactional intents, but the user experience has got a lot more rich in that scenario, sort of app service orchestration. I guess the being close to the changes now in this sector has really made a convert of me in terms of just how fit for purpose it is. At the same time, these technologies are moving at the same time. It's kind of like the time is right for NLP to really be the user interface for those high context, very broad user intents that are really hard to represent any other way if it's not graphical, if it's not NLP. So the market itself is growing. I think still those figures are quite underrated. It's hard to know for sure, but NLU. And I also don't think it's going to be something that developers at the app level need to concern themselves with too much. It'll be something that the device translates into sort of a set of instructions or codifies that the speech or the conversational element of that request. So that's it. They're the thoughts that are rambling around in my head. I hope they're of interest. And do we do questions, or how do we? Questions? So how do we get the user to talk, instead of talking transactionally, talk more naturally? See, it's interesting. The cooperative principle there is something I think Google coined the term about actually how one of the things that was underestimated in the whole NLP space was actually how humans would actually meet the computers halfway when it comes to us trying to help them understand us. The algorithms sort of, were very much pointed towards we have to understand the human, but actually we didn't consider the fact that humans would try to meet computers and have empathy for the computers at that level as well. And we met them halfway, and then I think it'll be a little bit of that, where if the user knows what's possible over time and that paradigm of transactional intents is broken, I think that's just a natural evolution, because we naturally think like that. It is something that it's the way we think anyhow. We don't think about all the heuristics I have to do to catch that plane. We just think about catching the plane. So I think we'll relearn actually what computers have perhaps forced us to think a little bit narrower on, is my guess. I don't have a hard solution I can hand to you in paper form, but I'll get working on it. No, the way I meant that, at least the way I currently see it in my head, is the OS is what understands user intent. As I guess clients are getting thicker, devices are getting thicker, and the ML chipsets that are on these devices now can do ridiculous things instantly, and actually then pass off essentially the learnings from that, or the derivations from that intent to each of the, so if we consider, say, ride sharing, again, I'll lean on that, and that app has, experience has a domain specific model of essentially a ride sharing model, it would understand that you need some intent. An element of that is ride sharing. It would talk to the ride sharing apps, if you will. How can you fill, or can you fill this request, or what is the way in which you can fulfill this request? Knowing the device, knowing what context is important, whether it's time, whether it's cost, whether it's whatever it might be, and then rate essentially those responses back from the ecosystem out there to actually provide the app, or transact with the app that makes sense in that situation for you at that time. So no, the app will just simply be queried. But in my mind, the way I see it is the app will just be queried, the response weighted, goes through a decision tree of who knows what it's thinking, and comes up and says, yeah, I'll decide to transact with you then. And the experience, or that transaction is set, and it's doing that. That's just an image. I think I Googled decision tree to get that image. I didn't think too much about it. Mm. 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 In terms of getting context, into context. So when I say intent, it's really just essentially the command, what it is I want to do. So the intent is I want to get on a plane, and then so for me that's an NLP issue, an NLP problem. Now, yes, there might be other things that needs to ultimately arrive at that, but then the context is important. So context is identity. There's payment context. There's environmental and situational context. All those things help decide for various experiences what may or may not be important in terms of parameters to each of those transactions. So you're looking for cosmetics for a friend, right? Well, you can't. Yeah. So same here. Like my daughter will use my YouTube account on the and so occasionally my feed will get sort of cluttered with her interests as well. Sorry, Sidemen. Yeah. So I'm not interested in this. Is something that I will tell Google that I'm not interested in. So as I said, it is a cooperative principle. The idea that AI can simply just take over and just know everything. It is a cooperative principle, and I think the more we help these devices and tools really learn us and behave in the way we want to, we're still in control. I guess would be, and so as a side point, everything about LinkedIn in terms of their algorithms and have probably a lot to be desired anyhow. But that's another story.
So we may just have one more question, then John will be here.
Yep.
Then we can quickly ask John with his thoughts.
Sure.
Do you think, because we're talking about the LinkedIn example, it seems like that's an adverse reaction of the computer not really understanding. And do you think we'll be able to counter that to the point where people are relying on this maybe OS-specific interaction and almost never interacting with apps?
So I still see apps as configurable, right? Obviously there's going to be, and if it does get to the point where it generates essentially a run sheet for you of things that intent has generated, then it'll be right there in front of you to override, I imagine. Like we're just making it up at the moment. So I imagine you'll have full control over you'd be able to dive into each of those transactions to vet or whatever. Yeah, I see it as something we're still in control. It'd be hard to imagine just a device just running our life without any involvement, but you know, at least opening the device up to solicit the intent, I think does at least make way for that possibility where the current app development paradigm doesn't. And that's why I think essentially it will flip over and break, and the apps will become the slaves, I think, to the device, is basically the thought bubble. I still think it'd be app development, just less of the GUI and more of the logic. Yeah. So thanks.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.